they thought I was dying. And maybe, in a way, I was. Not from illness, but from years of silence, from being seen only when needed, heard only when convenient, loved only when it benefited them. The doctors spoke of fading breath, of slowing hearts, but what they didn't understand was that mine had broken long before the sickness began. I wasn't afraid of death, I was afraid of being forgotten. Of leaving this world as nothing more than a name on a deed or a photo in a dusty frame. That night, when I called them close, I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for truth. The kind that burns when spoken aloud. And I watched it happen, the mask slipping, the smiles trembling, the lies crumbling under the weight of what I already knew. Every face around me became a mirror reflecting years of quiet betrayal. They thought I'd ask for peace, or blessings, or love. But I didn't. Because sometimes, the dying don't need comfort, they need to be remembered as they truly were. My last wish wasn't about money or inheritance. It was about peace, not the kind you find in heaven, but the kind that comes when you finally let go of those who never saw your worth. As the candle beside me flickered low, I realized I wasn't leaving behind pain anymore. I was leaving behind the truth, raw, heavy, unescapable. The kind they would carry long after my name fades from the walls of this house. And in that silence, as the rain whispered against the windows, I smiled. Because the one thing they feared most wasn't losing me. It was facing the truth I'd left behind, the truth they'd spend the rest of their lives trying to live with. The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence like a memory resurfacing. I hadn't heard it in months, maybe years. When I opened the door, the faces I saw looked familiar, but distant, like portraits of people I once loved, now touched by time and resentment. My son stood first, his eyes avoiding mine. Behind him, his wife, pretending to smile. Then my sister, dressed too nicely for a hospital visit, holding a basket of fruit as if that could erase years of silence. The air felt too thick, the house too quiet, and as they stepped inside, it felt less like a reunion, and more like an inspection. I forced a smile, but deep down, I already knew, they weren't here for me. They were here for what I was leaving behind. Dinner was quiet. Forks clinked, plates scraped, and everyone tried to sound caring while their eyes wandered, scanning the furniture, the paintings, the shelves. "Mom, you look strong," my son said, with a hesitation that felt rehearsed. His wife nodded, but her gaze lingered on the antique clock in the corner, the one that hadn't ticked since his father died. My sister asked about the will between sips of tea, pretending it was small talk. I gave her a slow smile. "Don't worry," I said softly. "Everything's already decided." The table went silent. Even the air stopped moving. That's when I noticed something. Their fear wasn't about losing me. It was about not getting what they thought was theirs. Later that night, when the guests had retired to their rooms, I sat in the living room with the old house creaking around me. The ticking clock suddenly came alive, slow, rhythmic, like a pulse returning after death. I could hear whispers upstairs, my son and his wife arguing in hushed tones. "She might not make it through the week," she said. "We should talk to the lawyer tomorrow." I closed my eyes, not in pain, but in understanding. They thought I was too weak to hear. Too fragile to see through their masks. But I'd lived too long in this house not to recognize the sound of greed when it spoke. And that night, as the storm outside began to rise, I whispered to myself. They said I didn't have much time left. And for the first time in years, they all came back. My son, his wife, my sister, faces I hadn't seen since the arguments, the inheritance, the silence. They stood by my bed, holding my hands, whispering sweet lies like prayers. Funny, isn't it? How people remember love only when they think you're dying. But I wasn't done yet, not with them, and not with the truth. Because sometimes, a last wish isn't about peace, it's about justice. They thought my words would be soft, that I'd bless them with my final breath. But what I said next, it changed everything. And before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Old Folks channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Morning came heavy and gray. Rain traced long trails down the windows, and the house felt colder than usual, as if it knew what was coming. I sat at the end of the dining table, wrapped in my shawl, watching my family pretend to care. My son scrolled through his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. His wife reheated coffee she didn't drink. My sister flipped through an old album, pointing at photos she once swore she'd burn. Their presence filled the room, but their warmth never did. I looked at each of them quietly and thought, they came here for closure, but I'll give them a confession instead. The kind of truth that doesn't heal, it haunts. That afternoon, I sat at my late husband's desk, the same one he used to write his business deals, his apologies, his secrets. The wood was cold beneath my hand. I pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper and began to write. Each word came slow, deliberate, as if the pen itself understood the weight of what I was confessing. It wasn't a will, not in the usual sense. It was a revelation. A final statement meant to break the quiet illusion they'd built after his death. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. The wind rattled the window frame. I paused, staring at the words I'd written, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. When I finished, I sealed the envelope with my trembling hands, marking it to be read when I'm gone. But inside, I knew they wouldn't have to wait that long. That evening, I gathered them in the living room. The fire flickered softly, painting their faces in gold and shadow. My son looked uneasy, my sister crossed her legs, trying to look composed. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice calm but carrying something sharper beneath it. "About my final wish." The words made them sit straighter. Eyes lifted. Hearts quickened. "I want to share something with you all before I go," I said, holding the sealed envelope gently between my fingers. Their gazes locked on it, a single piece of paper suddenly heavier than gold. In that moment, the air itself seemed to listen. They didn't know yet, this wasn't a gift. It was a mirror. And soon, they'd see everything they'd spent years pretending not to. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air heavy and still. The living room glowed softly under the chandelier, too bright, too polite for what was coming. They sat in a half-circle around me, my son, his wife, my sister, each one wearing a different mask. Concern. Boredom. Anticipation. The clock ticked loud enough to be a heartbeat. I could feel their eyes flick toward the envelope on the table. Its presence filled the space between us more than words ever could. "Mother," my son said finally, his voice careful. "You don't have to talk about this now. You need to rest." I smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Oh, I've rested long enough, dear. Tonight, it's your turn to listen." And just like that, the air thickened, the kind of silence that only comes before confession. I unfolded the paper slowly, the sound of it echoing across the room like thunder before a storm. My voice was soft at first, calm, almost tender. "Do you remember the year your father passed?" I asked. My sister nodded nervously. My son stared into his lap. "There were things he left behind," I continued. "Not just money, not just memories." I could feel the shift, their curiosity turning sharp, their comfort cracking. "I found letters. Contracts. Evidence." My gaze moved from face to face. Proof of what really happened to the inheritance, and who helped him hide it. My sister's hand trembled. My son's wife stiffened in her chair. I stopped reading. Let the silence speak. And in that silence, I saw the first spark of fear flicker in their eyes. My son finally spoke, his voice shaky but defiant. "Mother, you're confused. Dad handled everything. You shouldn't." "I shouldn't what?" I interrupted softly, setting the paper down. "Know the truth?" The fire hissed, a single ember popping in the stillness. "I was never confused, dear. Just patient." My words hung between us like a blade. His wife reached for his hand but didn't meet his eyes. My sister looked pale, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. I asked for honesty before he died, I said. He gave me lies. I asked you for family. You gave me silence. So tonight, I'm giving you both what you deserve, the truth. A single tear fell down my cheek, not from sadness, but release. The room no longer felt like home, it felt like a courtroom. And I was finally ready to deliver the verdict. The firelight flickered across their faces, carving deep shadows that made them look like strangers. I took a breath, slow, deliberate, before speaking again. When your father was sick, I said, he made me promise not to open the old study drawer. My sister looked away. My son's wife fidgeted, crossing her arms tightly. I honored that promise, for years. Until last month. The air grew colder, though the fire burned stronger. I found the papers inside, property deeds, altered wills, signatures that weren't mine. I looked at my sister. Yours wasn't either, was it? Her lips trembled. A tear slipped silently down her cheek, her silence an admission louder than any confession. That's when I realized, this wasn't about what they took. It was about what they believed I'd never find. My son rose from his chair, anger replacing the guilt flickering behind his eyes. Stop this, he said sharply. Dad trusted you, he left everything for us to manage. For you to manage, I corrected, my tone steady but cold. He froze. Do you know what it's like, I continued, to raise a child who learns to hide his greed behind duty? His wife stepped closer to him, her voice trembling. You're sick, you shouldn't be. I turned to her, cutting her words in half with a look. You knew too, didn't you? You helped him hide it. The clock struck again, one sharp, echoing chime. It wasn't just time passing. It was judgment arriving. And in that stillness, my son's shoulders slumped. The truth had found him, and he had nowhere left to run. The silence that followed was unbearable, the kind that made the air feel heavy enough to choke on. My sister wept quietly, whispering prayers under her breath. My son stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, his world collapsing with every second. You think I called you here to forgive you, I said softly. But I didn't. My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from release. I called you here so you could finally look at me and see what you did. I reached for the old will on the table and placed it in front of him. Everything your father took from me, it's going where it belonged all along. He looked up, eyes red, voice breaking. Mother, please, you can't mean that. I met his gaze, calm and final. Oh, my dear. I already did. And as the fire crackled behind me, I felt it, the moment everything changed. The moment truth stopped being a burden, and became freedom. The room that had once felt warm now felt suffocating, heavy with the smell of smoke, fear, and truth. My son stood frozen, his lips parting but no sound coming out. His wife clutched his arm, trembling, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then it began, the shouting. You can't do this, he said, his voice breaking between rage and disbelief. You're punishing me for something Dad did. I didn't move. You were old enough to know right from wrong, I said softly. And you chose silence. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the room like thunder. For a moment, I thought he'd cry. But instead, he just whispered, we needed that money, Mom. We thought you'd never find out. The words pierced deeper than any scream could. It wasn't about survival. It was about greed, quiet, deliberate, years in the making. His wife stepped forward, face pale, hands trembling. I told him not to, she blurted, her voice shaking. I said it would come back to haunt us. Her words fell like stones in still water, every ripple a new confession. My eyes shifted to her, calm, unreadable. And yet you stayed quiet, I said. You smiled at me. You brought me flowers. Tears welled in her eyes, her mascara smudging under the weight of guilt. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said weakly. Intentions don't erase actions, I replied. You took comfort in my blindness. She looked at my son for help, but he turned away, guilt now consuming him more than anger ever did. The sound of the fire crackling behind us was the only reminder that time was still moving forward, that nothing could be undone. And in that moment, she realized forgiveness was not coming. Not tonight. Not ever. Then my sister, quiet all evening, finally spoke. Her voice was faint, but her words cut sharper than the rest. He didn't die of illness, she said. He knew what he did, and it broke him. My heart skipped a beat. The air seemed to stop moving. What are you saying? I whispered. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Your husband, he left a letter. I found it, but I burned it. I couldn't bear for you to see what he wrote. The room spun slightly, my breath shallow, the weight of betrayal doubling in an instant. A letter. A truth buried to protect me, or to protect them? My son looked at her in shock. You knew? Her silence was answer enough. And in that one terrible second, I realized, the secrets in this family didn't die with him. They multiplied. And now, every one of them was finally crawling into the light. The room fell into a suffocating silence. No one dared to move. Only the faint ticking of the old clock filled the air, steady, cruel, reminding us that time never stops, even when hearts do. I stared at my sister, her trembling hands clutching her shawl as if it could shield her from what she had just confessed. A letter? I whispered, my voice thin, fragile. You burned it? She nodded slowly, eyes avoiding mine. It wasn't meant for you to see, Evelyn. He said things that would have broken you. Her words floated in the air like smoke, thick, suffocating, and impossible to breathe through. But pain wasn't something I feared anymore. Not after what I'd already endured. What could hurt me more than a lifetime of lies? I asked quietly. No one answered. The truth was, they all already knew, and that silence was my answer. Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and the arguments faded into whispers, I found myself drawn to his old study. It still smelled like him, leather, ink, and the faint bitterness of whiskey. The desk was covered in dust, untouched for years, yet something inside me told me to look closer. My fingers traced the wood until I found it, a false bottom beneath the drawer. It creaked open with resistance, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was what I'd both feared and hoped for, another letter. The paper was yellowed, fragile, and the handwriting, his. My breath hitched. My knees weakened. I sat down, candle flickering beside me, and unfolded the truth that had waited all these years. The first line stopped my heart cold. If she's reading this, it means I failed to make peace before I left. I read slowly, each word heavier than the last. He spoke of the night everything changed, the argument, the deal, the betrayal that cost us everything. But then came the line that shattered me. It wasn't the company I lost, it was you. And I took from you something you never knew, something that was never mine to keep. My hand trembled so hard I nearly tore the page. Tears blurred the ink as I reached the end. Forgive me, Evelyn. But if you can't, let the truth live longer than my lies. Outside, thunder rumbled, soft but distant, as if the sky itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. I folded the letter with shaking hands, realizing something terrible yet freeing. He hadn't just broken my trust. He had given me the power to break the cycle. Something lift, a weight years in the making, leaving behind only quiet, trembling peace. The storm passed, but the house still echoed with the sound of thunder, not from outside, but from within. After I spoke, everyone left the table slowly, their faces pale, their steps uncertain. No shouting. No apologies. Just silence, the kind that cuts deeper than any words ever could. I sat there alone, the clock ticking steadily on the wall, its rhythm like a heartbeat in an empty chest. The letter lay where I'd left it, a symbol of what had been hidden and finally unearthed. I ran my fingers along its edge, feeling the roughness of the paper, the weight of everything it carried. Some truths don't destroy you immediately, they seep in slowly, like cold water under a door. And in that moment, I wondered, had I freed myself, or doomed them all to carry what I no longer could? Later that evening, I walked through the old halls, each step echoing softly against the wooden floor. The portraits on the walls watched me with still, painted eyes, my husband's, my younger self's, our family before everything fell apart. The air smelled faintly of rain and old perfume, stirring memories I'd buried long ago. I paused at the door to his study, the same place I'd found the letter. For a moment, I half expected to hear his voice, calm and familiar, asking if I'd made the right choice. I whispered into the quiet, I told them, Charles. I finally told them. The silence that answered was both hollow and peaceful, as if the house itself exhaled. I closed the door gently, not with anger, but with finality. The past was no longer locked inside it. That night, I wrote my own letter, not of confession, but of closure. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, it was meant for whoever found it after I was gone. My last wish, I wrote, is not for forgiveness or inheritance. It's for peace. For the truth to live even when I no longer can. As I folded the paper, I felt my hands tremble, not from weakness, but from release. The house was quiet now, lit only by the glow of a single lamp and the soft hum of rain outside. I looked toward the window and saw my reflection, older, yes, but no longer burdened. For the first time in years, I smiled. And as I blew out the candle, I whispered, tomorrow, they'll finally understand why I had to do it. The storm passed, but the house still echoed with the sound of thunder, not from outside, but from within. After I spoke, everyone left the table slowly, their faces pale, their steps uncertain. No shouting. No apologies. Just silence, the kind that cuts deeper than any words ever could. I sat there alone, the clock ticking steadily on the wall, its rhythm like a heartbeat in an empty chest. The letter lay where I'd left it, a symbol of what had been hidden and finally unearthed. I ran my fingers along its edge, feeling the roughness of the paper, the weight of everything it carried. Some truths don't destroy you immediately, they seep in slowly, like cold water under a door. And in that moment, I wondered, had I freed myself, or doomed them all to carry what I no longer could? Later that evening, I walked through the old halls, each step echoing softly against the wooden floor. The portraits on the walls watched me with still, painted eyes, my husband's, my younger self's, our family before everything fell apart. The air smelled faintly of rain and old perfume, stirring memories I'd buried long ago. I paused at the door to his study, the same place I'd found the letter. For a moment, I half expected to hear his voice, calm and familiar, asking if I'd made the right choice. I whispered into the quiet, I told them, Charles. I finally told them. The silence that answered was both hollow and peaceful, as if the house itself exhaled. I closed the door gently, not with anger, but with finality. The past was no longer locked inside it. That night, I wrote my own letter, not of confession, but of closure. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, it was meant for whoever found it after I was gone. My last wish, I wrote, is not for forgiveness or inheritance. It's for peace. For the truth to live even when I no longer can. As I folded the paper, I felt my hands tremble, not from weakness, but from release. The house was quiet now, lit only by the glow of a single lamp and the soft hum of rain outside. I looked toward the window and saw my reflection, older, yes, but no longer burdened. For the first time in years, I smiled. And as I blew out the candle, I whispered, tomorrow, they'll finally understand why I had to do it. The morning light crept gently through the lace curtains, painting the room in soft gold and shadow. Birds sang outside, faint, uncertain, as if testing the quiet that had followed the storm of the night before. I opened my eyes slowly, the ache in my bones softer than usual, my breath steady and calm. On the nightstand sat the folded letter, my own, beside the half-empty glass of water. For a long while, I simply stared at it, feeling the weight of everything that had finally been said. The world outside went on as if nothing had changed, but within these walls, everything had. The truth was no longer buried beneath lies or silence, it was free. And so, for the first time in years, so was I. I heard the door open softly downstairs, hesitant footsteps, the kind that belonged to guilt and sorrow. It was my son. I could recognize his rhythm anywhere, even after all these years apart. He entered quietly, his eyes swollen, the letter I'd written the night before clutched in his hand. "Mother," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I turned my head toward him, offering a tired smile, not of forgiveness, but of understanding. "It's all right," I said softly. "Some truths aren't meant to be discovered while we're still trying to love each other." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he knelt beside the bed, his hand gripping mine like he was afraid to let go. And for a moment, just a moment, the years of distance vanished between us. The light grew brighter, spilling across the room like a slow, tender wave. I could feel it warming my face, the same way it used to when Charles and I would watch the sunrise through this very window. My breath grew slower, lighter, as if my body had finally caught up with the peace my heart had made. I looked once more at my son, the tears, the remorse, the love, and whispered, "Promise me you'll live differently now. Don't bury your truth like we did." He nodded through his sobs, holding my hand tighter, his words lost in the sound of the morning wind. And as I closed my eyes, I felt no fear, only release, only quiet. The house, once heavy with secrets, now felt still and clean, like it, too, could finally rest. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that once echoed with laughter and slammed doors. Dust floated through the afternoon light like drifting ghosts, and the ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than it should. I could hear the creak of the front gate, the hesitant footsteps on the porch, and then, the door opened. My son stepped in first, older now, his hair thinner, his smile practiced. Behind him came his wife, her perfume cutting through the stale air like an uninvited memory. My sister followed last, clutching her handbag as if afraid the house might take something from her. Their eyes searched the room before they met mine, lying frail in bed, pretending not to notice their unease. After years of silence, they were finally here. But I couldn't tell if they came for me, or for what I might still own. I watched them exchange polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. My son placed a bouquet on the table, lilies, white and scentless, the kind people bring to funerals. "You look good, Mom," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "Better than you expected?" The air hung heavy with unsaid things. Every look between them felt like a calculation, every word carefully chosen to sound caring but not curious. My sister began tidying random things around the room, avoiding my gaze, as if the clutter mattered more than the years she'd been gone. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, soft but growing. And as the rain began to tap against the window, I realized something chilling: they hadn't come because they missed me. They'd come because they thought time was finally running out. Dinner was awkward, quiet chewing, clinking spoons, and too many polite questions. My daughter-in-law forced a smile. "The doctor says you're stable now, right?" I nodded. "For now." She looked down, disappointed. My sister sipped her tea, trembling slightly, pretending not to listen. I could almost hear their thoughts. What if she lasts longer than we thought? What about the will? I glanced toward the fire, watching the flames twist like secrets trying to escape. The house, once warm, felt colder than ever. Then, I spoke, my voice breaking the fragile peace. "Before I go," I said, "there's something I need to tell you all." The spoons froze midair. Because in that moment, they didn't know whether to feel relief or fear.